Hello, my name is Bill Coughlin, and welcome to First Person Civil War Podcast, which retells the stories of the soldiers and officers on the ground in the battles of the Civil War. Episode 26 is entitled Corporal John R. McBride in the 33rd Indiana at the Battle of Thompson Station, and relies on his book, History of the 33rd Indiana Veteran Volunteer Infantry during the 4 years of Civil War from September 16, 1861 to July 21, 1865, which he published in 1900. John R. McBride lived in Morgan County, Indiana, when the war began, and patriotic fervor was at an all-time high in August 1861. When Company K of the 7th Indiana returned from its 90-day enlistment. An infantry company called the Lion Guards, which formed at this time, received approval from Indianapolis to muster men for service in Morgan County on 25 August 1861, and John R. McBride enlisted in the company on 16 September 1861. The Lion Guards became Company C, 33rd Indiana, and were stationed in Kentucky. They fought at the Battle of Camp Wildcat in 1861, and on 15 February 1862, Private McBride was promoted to corporal in Company C. Following the Battle of Stones River, which was 31 December 1862 to 2 January 1863, General Rosecrans, commander of the Army of the Cumberland, made a call for reinforcements in the wake of that engagement. On 23 January, the Department of Ohio received orders to send a force of 20 infantry regiments, which included the 33rd Indiana, as well as 4 cavalry regiments and 4 batteries of artillery, by boat from Louisville, Kentucky to Nashville, Tennessee. 54 transports and 6 gunboats made the trip by way of the Ohio and Cumberland rivers down to Nashville. Now in Tennessee, Corporal McBride and the 33rd Indiana were in the 1st Brigade, commanded by their regimental commander, Colonel John Coburn, and Brigadier General Absalom Baird's 3rd Division of the Army of Kentucky, commanded by Major General Gordon Granger. On 2 March, the 1st Brigade received orders to station at Brentwood, along the road between Franklin and Nashville. The next day, Colonel Coburn received orders to march his brigade, which consisted of the 33rd Indiana, 85th Indiana, 19th Michigan, and 22nd Wisconsin, with the addition of the 124th Ohio, approximately 600 cavalry, and a battery from the 18th Ohio Artillery to occupy Spring Hill on what was planned to be a 4-day expedition of the area. Once at Spring Hill, Colonel Coburn was instructed to send reconnoitering parties to Columbia and Raleigh Springs along the Lewisburg Pike, where a cavalry force from Murfreesboro would link with it. On the morning of 4 March, Corporal McBride and the 33rd Indiana departed Brentwood, Tennessee. The forces were light in marching order, with blankets rolled shot pouch fashion, no knapsacks or tents. The shot pouch method was common during the war and meant that Corporal McBride placed items that would normally go in his knapsack or backpack into the blanket, roll it up lengthwise, secured with rope or string, and wear it over her shoulder. And he continues, all the men being in jubilant spirits, supposing they were only going on a foraging expedition. They thought the expedition would be a pleasant diversion from the restraints to which we were subjected while in camp. The weather was cool and favorable, and the road being turnpike, the movement was made with great facility. Unbeknownst to Corporal McBride and the rest of Colonel Coburn's overstrength brigade was that Confederate Major General Earl Van Dorn was on the same turnpike conducting a reconnaissance in force north toward Franklin, Tennessee, with a portion of his corps, which included Brigadier General William H. Jackson's cavalry division and Nathan Bedford Forrest's cavalry. With one division of my command, I encountered a large body of enemy with a long baggage train, and after forcing him to deploy by a show of force and a few shots from Captain King's 2nd Missouri Battery, I withdrew my troops to a position this side of Thompson Station, and there awaited the approach of the enemy. Corporal McBride and the 33rd Indiana arrayed along the road to meet Major General Van Dorn's cavalry. After advancing about 4 miles, they, meaning the entire Union force, were confronted by a considerable force of the enemy with 2 artillery pieces. In the disposition of troops, the cavalry were deployed and advanced to the right of the road, with the 33rd Indiana and 22nd Wisconsin, with a section of battery also on the right. He details the rest of the brigade's position and then continues. While the exchange of shots was going on, the 33rd Indiana, 22nd Wisconsin, and 19th Michigan advanced, when the enemy fell back and for a time wholly disappeared from sight. All 3 infantry regiments retreated to their original position, while the Union cavalry scouted the surrounding area. They gathered that the overall Confederate force outnumbered the Union brigade along the turnpike. Colonel Coburn sent word back to his division commander at Franklin and advanced a further 2 miles down the road. During the night, Major General Van Dorn sent scouts to ascertain the strength of the Union force in front of him. Once he knew that he outnumbered them, he decided to fight. On the morning of 5 March, he selected the ground and awaited the arrival of Colonel Coburn's brigade. Given the Confederates' response after the skirmishing of the day before, Corporal McBride and others were eager to meet the enemy again. The troops were under arms at 4 a.m. and in excellent spirits. He talks about getting in marching order and then continues. The brigade was inspired with the idea that they were equal to the emergency. Confident of success, they felt as though the enemy would run, the same as the day previous. Thompson Station was a railroad stop along the Nashville and Decatur Railroad, and situated in a small valley with several hills to its north and south. On the morning of 5 March, Major General Van Dorn placed his cavalry and artillery on the hills south of the station and awaited the arrival of Coburn's brigade, which marched along the Columbia Turnpike and into position on the hills north of the station by 10:30. Corporal McBride and the 33rd Indiana were a part of the right wing, which also consisted of the 85th Indiana and 2 pieces of artillery, and posted on the western side of the turnpike. As both wings prepared for battle, Confederate and Union artillery began to duel. The right wing was also within range of Confederate sharpshooters, who were in the buildings around Thompson Station, and Colonel Coburn ordered that wing to push them from this position. Corporal McBride and the 33rd Indiana advanced with the 85th Indiana towards Thompson Station, with further orders to engage the artillery beyond. The movement was made with the utmost precision and confidence until they were met by a galling and disastrous fire from behind the stone wall by 2 brigades of dismounted cavalry. They were compelled to seek shelter and protection behind the railroad embankment without firing a shot. According to Major General Van Dorn, this brigade, Colonel Whitfield's Texans of Jackson's division, pursued the 33rd and 85th Indiana regiments as they retreated uphill. But Corporal McBride and his fellow Hoosiers didn't run for long. The enemy at once took advantage of their exposed position and opened on them with musketry and 2 pieces of artillery, Jackson's division following in hot pursuit. The regiments, however, reached the crest of the hill in time to enable them to form in line of battle. When they repulsed the enemy's charge with ease, the enemy prepared for a second attack and moved forward with apparent confidence. He talks about artillery engaging the Texans and then continues. But just at that supreme moment, the men were informed that it had just left the field. Captain Charles C. Alshire, commander of the 18th Ohio Battery, justifies the withdrawal of his 5 artillery pieces, as by this point they were almost completely out of ammunition. Even before the right wing advanced, Captain Alshire reported to Colonel Coburn of this predicament. He was also in contact with Colonel Thomas Jefferson Jordan, commander of the 9th Pennsylvania Cavalry, who was in their immediate rear. Colonel Jordan then came to me and ordered me to withdraw my guns from the left, Corporal McBride's wing, that they being charged by infantry and cavalry, which I did immediately. He returned to the guns on the right, and he continues. Colonel Jordan then ordered me to withdraw these guns also, and fall back to the hill where we fought the first day, and cover the retreat, and he would send his cavalry to support me, he fearing that we would be flanked by cavalry. Major General Van Dorn noticed the 18th Ohio Battery depart, and ordered all of Jackson's division to attack up the turnpike, while Brigadier General Forrest's cavalry got behind Coburn's brigade by a flank movement. Corporal McBride, still in line with the 33rd Indiana, continued to fight. The enemy advanced in an irregular line through the woods from tree to tree. Our troops sought like protection, and in many instances, conflict became hand-to-hand. Coburn's brigade held the position firmly and with determination, and a second time repulsed the enemy with great slaughter. Despite Brigadier General Forrest's successful flanking movement, Colonel Coburn's brigade continued to fight. The brigade was formed in line, bayonets fixed, and all things made ready for a charge under a galling fire, which cost us some of our best men. The men would willingly have made the desperate venture without a shot in their cartridge boxes. Nothing remained but to give the word to charge. I was convinced that a massacre would ensue to little purpose, that a few might escape, but that many would fall in a vain struggle for life with unequal weapons. I ordered a surrender. I believed it was justified by the circumstances. Corporal McBride estimated his brigade fought on until 4 p.m., when the flag of truce ended the Battle of Thompson Station. The men silently laid down their arms, unloaded and useless, and took off their empty cartridge boxes, standing in orderly ranks while the enemy approached. Thus ended suddenly the struggle. Remaining in place, the commanding officers stood to their posts, while the foe advanced, taking up their arms. Generals Van Dorn and Forrest came forward and greeted Colonel Coburn. The formal words of surrender took place, and in a very few minutes, the gallant remainder of the brigade, 1,221 in number, were marched off from the field, leaving the dead and wounded there. The number captured represented approximately half of Coburn's brigade. The brigade wagon trains, the 124th Ohio that guarded them, the 18th Ohio Battery, and the attached cavalry managed to evade capture. While the officers of all captured commands were sent to a separate prison camp, Corporal McBride and the enlisted men of Coburn's brigade began a long journey to Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia, and arrived there on 21 March 1863. Not having any change of clothing and denied water for cleansing purposes, they had become so vermin-infested that it was almost impossible to get any rest. and only when nature would become totally exhausted. And he continues, all had the opportunity to write letters to friends and loved ones at home, but none of the letters were ever forwarded. The guards, as a rule, were insolent. The stifling air, the contaminated rations of food and water, it was no wonder that many of them died. The wonder is that any of them lived. In early April 1863, the men captured at Thompson Station received paroles and returned north. Many of the men were admitted into hospitals for treatment, but once a parolee was able to travel, he was sent back to Indiana and received a 10-day furlough. Following the furlough, the men traveled to Indianapolis, where the captured companies reconstituted. By 18 June 1863, at Franklin, Tennessee, the reconstituted companies rejoined Company B and the regimental band of the 33rd Indiana, which were not at the Battle of Thompson Station. Corporal McBride remained in the 33rd Indiana and received a promotion to first lieutenant on 8 October 1864. The regiment participated in the Atlanta Campaign, Sherman's March to the Sea, and the Carolinas Campaign, after which it returned to Indiana and mustered out of service. John R. McBride, though not officially stated, was appointed by the men of the regiment to write History of the 33rd Indiana Veteran Volunteer Infantry during the 4 years of Civil War from September 16, 1861 to July 21, 1865. But this was not an easy task. The War Department retained all official records of the 33rd Indiana, and it is presumed of most regiments north and south, as it was in the process of publishing the War of the Rebellion series. John McBride also had to vie with others on what sources that were available. Harassed on every hand by obstacles of varying degrees, often checkmated at the very moment some important data were about to be grasped, and failure to receive the hearty cooperation of many who were equally interested, are incidents in the collection of material for this regimental history that have at times well-nigh jeopardized the completion of the work and worn out the patience of the writer. John McBride was still determined to complete this work, and relied on diaries and oral histories from the men of the regiment to fill in the gaps when he could not obtain official records. Thank you for listening to the 26th episode. The link to Corporal McBride's book is now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find a picture of John R. McBride, sometime around 1900. For next week's episode, I've decided to make it a special episode to coincide with events 161 years in the past. 3rd Lieutenant J. Rowan Rogers of Company I, 47th North Carolina, on 1 July, face. Corporal William W. Strong of Company E, 121st Pennsylvania, on Seminary Ridge, and on 3 July, face. 1st Lieutenant William P. Seville, Adjutant of the 1st Delaware, at the Stone Wall, on Cemetery Ridge, at the Battle of Gettysburg. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.